In this demo, I'm going to be having a look at your network architecture POE document. We're going to do the first part in this discussion. I'm just scrolling up on your POE document just to recap. Scenario. You've been appointed to plan and design a mega library and multimedia technology center network project. The network is intended to be rolled out by the government department in various municipalities and locations. For the purposes of testing and initiating the design and its implementation, the project will be limited to 2 locations, one in your local city and another in a different city. You are required to identify the names of the 2 cities for reference and naming specifications. In this scenario, the cities will be referred to as City 1 and City 2. If I go into Learn, you will see that under More Resources here, you've got a diagram that has been given to you on the POE scenario. If I look at the POE scenario, they've told me that I've got a library, and the library contains these different devices. The connection lab has got these different devices. Multimedia and technologies facility has got these devices. IT support office, server room, and then at this particular site, I also need to take into consideration security, CCTV, and secure access. This is City 1 or Site 1. Then I will have Site 2 or City 2. They will be identical to each other. These are the 2 sites that we have. Now, looking at what is required for the POE. We have completed part 1 and part 2. In the POE now, firstly, we need to do section A on activity 1 and activity 2, and then section B on, there's 4 activities here, and section C. I'll do a different video on section A, activities 1 and 2, because that's just feedback on the work that has already been completed. In this demo, I'm going to be looking at your network solution proposal. The floor plan and physical network diagram I'll also briefly discuss, and your WAN diagram briefly discuss as well. So in this demo, I'm looking at activities 1, 2, and 3 from section B of the POE. The network solution proposal is a written document. Inside of this written document, what is it that I need to have? I need to have network solution proposal. That's the name of the document. I'm going to watch these videos on network architecture and Wireshark. And then I'm going to write out a network design proposal, which is a written report or document. And in this document, I'm going to have a cover page, table of contents, disclaimer, a background, which is going to talk about the scenario, which I've just read. What is it? Multimedia and Technology Center in 2 locations, City 1 and City 2. That's talking about the scenario. Need for network solution. We need to set up Active Directory and client computers and user accounts, computer accounts, create the network for both of the sites. Description summary of the solution. That's what I'm talking about now. Active Directory, network components, hardware, devices, what clients, servers, printers, projectors, meeting room, etc. Basically, in this network component section, we're going to go back to this diagram. So use this diagram as a reference point. Also check that the diagram has got everything that's mentioned in the case study and nothing is missing from this diagram. So if it says network components, You will talk about the clients, the servers, the projectors, the meeting rooms, etc. that you have at a particular site. And all of that is mentioned here. Network type, is it a LAN or a WAN, including wireless considerations? So you'll go back and you look at part one, what did you do? Part two, what did you do? And you'll be taking information from there and then summarizing it in your proposal. So for this part where it says LAN, WAN, including wireless considerations, if I go to my document, to my diagram again, I need to set up a LAN here. Here you can see that I've got a floor plan indicating the different departments within the site, but I do not have in this diagram, I don't have the network connections. So in other words, in each of these offices, I need to install a switch to connect all of these devices to each other. Then I would need a switch that's going to connect the library to the server room, to the connection lab, to the multimedia and technologies facility, to the IT support office. Then I would need a router that's going to give the site internet connectivity. So those are the elements or network devices that is missing. This is a floor plan. It's not network. It's not the required network diagram. To get the required network diagram, what am I going to do? I'm going to be adding in the network components. Like here, for example, I can see in the connection lab, I've got a wireless access point. Is that wireless access point only Wi-Fi only going to be in the connection lab, or do the other people also need Wi-Fi? Do they also need wireless access points? You need to include that as well. So for each of these offices, I'm going to insert a switch, 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 connect all of the switches to each other, connect the devices, these components to the switches. I'm going to insert a router, and I'm going to connect the router to the internet. Firewall. I need to include a firewall at some place. Now, very briefly, I've talked about the network diagram. So if I look at this here, before I go through the rest of this, it says floor plan and physical network diagram for site one. Using an appropriate tool such as Microsoft Visio, draw a comprehensive floor plan, physical network diagram for site one. The floor plan must include fully labeled diagram legends indicated, including a narrative explaining the detail of the diagram. In other words, you need to include a summary, written summary of what's happening in the diagram. In the diagram or floor plan above, it is for, let's say, what a narrative would look like. This floor plan indicates the site layout for Library and Multimedia Technology Center. At this site, we have a library that includes these devices, a connection lab that includes these devices, multimedia and technologies facility that includes these devices, IT support office, server room, and then at the site, we also need to control access to the site. We need to have CCTV monitoring system at the site. So basically, the narrative is describing what's going on in the diagram. So they say, draw the diagram. There's your diagram for site one, plus write out a description like I've described. Include the following features and components. Internet connection, that's missing in the diagram. Remember I said you need to put in a router and you need to connect it to the internet. Network devices, including for wireless. In the diagram, we only saw that there was one wireless access point. You need to add multiple wireless access points. You need to add Ethernet switches into these here and connect them to each other. Nodes or endpoint devices, cabling that's incorrectly spelled. We are using Ethernet cabling, category 6 Ethernet cabling. Wireless connection, Wi-Fi, you're going to say if you are using IEEE 802.ACAX, which wireless standard are you using? The latest one is Wi-Fi 6, 802.11 AX. You got Wi-Fi 5, which was AC, and you got AX, which is Wi-Fi 6. So you'll use the latest one available. Other, make any appropriate assumptions. The following resource helps to unpack. You can have a look at those additional videos as well there. How are the marks allocated? For each of these, always go back to the marking rubric to ensure you have all the relevant information on your diagram or POE. In this one, network diagram is provided for site 1, 4 marks. Physical, okay, that's 4 marks. Floor plan, okay, this is looking at building partitioning. Okay, the different sections. Do you have library, connection, multimedia, support? You don't just have one big floor, right? So here they're looking for the partitioning. This one, they're looking for network devices. Here, I can only see one network device, WAP. As I've said, you need to include the other network devices. Next one, servers and endpoint services. In this diagram, there's servers that I can see here, Active Directory, web server, mail server, file server, firewall. There's no firewall here. So there needs to be a firewall that's connecting me to the internet. So endpoint would be what is connecting this network to the internet or to another network. That would be my router. That's missing here. So I'll put it in a router here in my server room, and then I'll connect it to the internet. Next one, labeling. Cabling. We spoke about Ethernet. Wireless. That's the Wi-Fi, the wireless access point. Assumptions, they give 3. Best practices, they give another 3 marks as well. That's the diagram now for activity 2. Going back to complete now, here, physical components is where we stopped. You are going to describe all of these components that we saw here. Next one, network type. We have both LAN and WAN and Wi-Fi network. You're going to describe what you've written in part 1 and part 2 about LAN, WAN, and Wi-Fi. Network topology. Topology is the physical layout of the network. Generally, we would use a star topology or we would use a hybrid topology, a combination of different topology. Network segmentation, that's forest, domains, and sites. We have one domain. Remember in activity 5, we created one domain in your server that we installed. Okay, from part 2, we created one domain. So that domain is the same thing that you're going to be using to complete your POE from activity 5. The domain is a database of Active Directory objects, which I'll discuss in more detail when I'm discussing the proposed solution. In other words, section This one here, the virtual solution. So the virtual solution is where I need to use Hyper-V to create the solution. And that I'm going to do in a different demonstration video. So where am I now? Namespace is the name of your domain. Forest is also the name of your domain. This is DNS namespace, okay? If you go back and look at that activity 5 from part 2, that will describe your domains, your forests, and then the sites. We've got City 1 and City 2 as two different sites. Network segmentation, IP address, and subnetting. What we can do here is we can use the IP addresses that we use. Now look at the mark allocation here. They've given us a significant amount of marks. In a separate video, when I'm setting up activity 4, where we're creating the actual ranges of IP addresses or subnets, I will give you more information in that video. For now, you just need to know that we're going to create IP addresses for the different sections of the site. In other words, library will have a range of IP addresses. Connection lab might have a range of IP addresses. Each of these different sections within my organization could have different address ranges, which have been subnetted. Remember, we did a subnetting example as well. That was in part 1. So we need to go back and look at what did we do previously and then include that information here. Network protocols and access methods. Here we spoke about TCP/IP. We spoke about CSMA/CD, which was what? Ethernet. We spoke about IEEE 802.11, which is Wi-Fi standard. And now we said we're going to be using 802.11ax as the Wi-Fi standard. Logical network components. Here, you're going to speak about what it means, client-server networking, Active Directory, DNS, dynamic host configuration protocol, software and applications, and how is it applicable to the scenario. We are using client-server networking where we have dedicated servers in the server room here, and the rest are all client computers connecting to these server computers. We are using Active Directory. Here, for example, can you see one of my servers is Active Directory in the server room? That server is called a domain controller. It will have the Active Directory database. Domain naming system, DHCP, that also needs to be included here. So in the server room, I need to have a server that says DNS. I need to have a server that says DHCP. Can you see we're seeing things that are missing from this diagram? DNS does what? It tells me for any name what is the computer's IP address. So host name to IP address mapping is done by DNS. DHCP, what does it do? It gives me IP addresses. Who am I? I'm a client. I'm looking for an IP address. When a client comes onto my TCP/IP network, it says, hello, I'm looking for an IP address. Can you give me an IP address? Who's going to answer that request? The DHCP server. But in order for the DHCP server to answer the request, it needs to have IP addresses that I have set up on the DHCP server. So it will get those from there. And then software and applications, what did they say that we needed? You make assumptions if they haven't said. We naturally will need some They told us about library management system, isn't it? I need to search electronic databases. I will need Office for our Office applications, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. So these are the common things that we would be using. Is there any other multimedia software that I need to play videos, to maybe record videos? So you think about what would be needed in this place. And then you would be able to say what software was used. Can you see they didn't tell us what software? So when they are talking about assumptions that we are making, if you are a multimedia center, you are doing graphic design, you are making movies, you're editing the movies, what software are you going to be using? We need to specify now what are the software applications that we are using. Network component. Right, so we've completed network component. Security and performance. Security standards, security threat management, cryptography, and firewall. What are we going to be talking about here? What did we learn about? We learned about public key infrastructure. We learned about firewalls. Go back to your notes, go back to your slides, go back to RC Learn. Look at the security that was covered on Learn. So if I go back into Learn now, and I look under my learning units, where is that being covered now? Network media, network topologies. Remember they spoke about network topologies, wireless and remote networking, and network management. Let's see under network management. Network security is under theme 1. So theme 1 is talking about network security. If I go into network security now, under network security, they speak about the CIA triad. Then they say, go look at chapter 11 of your prescribed textbook. So go to chapter 11 slides for network security. That should cover the concepts here. Security tools. Also in this section, they're looking at firewalls, Wireshark. They gave us a video that we needed to watch earlier, access control list, Hyper-V, etc. So that's covered both these questions here, chapter 11, security. Assumptions. What did they not tell us that you assumed? Things that you made up, that you guessed. And then finally, network design best practices. And now that concludes the report that needs to be written for the first part, which is activity 1 in section B. We have spoken about already the network diagram, which was activity 2. And then finally, activity 3 now is speaking about the diagram for site 1 and site 2, which I've given you as well. If I go to more resources, a basic diagram was given to you in this guideline. So here in this guideline, there's your WAN diagram. You've got site 1, you've got site 2. They are both connected to the internet. They are using a VPN connection via the internet. This is a very summarized diagram of what needs to be done. In addition to this, you're going to add the relevant information. Now let's see what is the information that they want us to add to this diagram. How will I know? The diagram, narrative, and then the following features or components. Internet connection, we've got network devices and endpoints. We've only got VPN symbol, but we don't have the VPN server. We don't have a remote access server. So those things needs to be put in. Cabling, VPN, we've got Wi-Fi, subnetting, other appropriate assumptions. So the first part is the logical network diagram. That's what we've got. Next one, it says allocation of network devices, network connection services, and endpoints. In this, in addition here, what are we going to be adding? Where's that? There's the diagram. We are going to be adding what's connecting site 1 to the internet. It's a router that's missing here, or a router that's missing. So we need to add in a router here. We need to add in a router here. That router is connected to a server. What is that server called? Routing and remote access server. So we need to include a server at site 1. Same thing needs to be done on site 2. You'll add a router, and then you'll add a server, and that server is called a routing and remote access server. Those servers are acting as your endpoint. What's next? WAN allocation of servers. So here we said network devices, network connections, servers, and endpoints. Here they are saying what other servers are required and where are they located. Here, labeling of the diagram. Here, cabling. What cables? What is going to be connecting us to the internet? Fiber optic cable. Yes? So we need to include in that diagram fiber optic cable. Devices, cables, access methods, IP addresses. Access points and wireless connections. So here you're going to add your WAPs or wireless access points and wireless network cards. Any assumptions, and then best practices. So there's the basic diagram. You're going to include more details in this diagram. What are the additional details? The different types of servers you're going to have at each of the different sites, such as your routing and remote access server, devices such as routers, firewalls that you could include here as well. Cables connecting you to the internet is what cable? Fiber optic cable. And then, so you basically look at the marking rubric. You say, have I got all of these things in my diagram? And then you're going to add it. How to draw the diagram? There's a very basic video that I've done on how to use Visio. So there's using Visio to create network diagrams. So you can watch this. There's a number of other videos available on use of Visio. Okay, you've got both on campus, you've got the desktop version, and then on your OneDrive account, you've also got an online version of Visio. You can use either one of them. And that concludes this section of the discussion. So in this discussion, I've looked at activities 1, 2, and 3 from section B of your NWAR5122 POE. In the next demo, so that's 50 marks out of the 80 marks that I've looked at. The other 30 marks is on the server configuration, which we installed in part 2. And I'll do a separate video on that.